Hi, hello, everybody. Happy April 1st. What we are doing today, is what we're going to talk about today, is we're going to talk about one more style of demonstration that we haven't officially discussed, I suppose, which is the style of demonstrating, which is an organized march. We're going to talk about probably the most famous, well, that's a tough one, again, the largest scale march to take place during our civil rights movement, which is the March on Washington in '63. After that, we're going to talk about the unexpected changing of the guard, knowing that JFK is not going to survive through his first term in office, and he is going to be succeeded by his vice president, who will go on to run for office in his own right in '64. So we'll talk a little bit about that transition and how he approaches his time in office with his own programs and things like that. At the end of today, I've got some work to be completed reminders, some things to keep in mind, full stop. So just keep that going for us here. And we're going to dive right in. So make sure you have your notebooks out and that we're ready to begin. So on August 1963, in August of 1963, towards the end of the month, we're going to see that something that had almost happened once before is going to officially happen now in this new time, in this new era. A. Philip Randolph, who we spoke about before, again, we finished with our Unit 2 on World War II. Bayard Rustin of the SCLC, along with Martin Luther King Jr., are going to organize a large-scale march to basically show support for a new program that JFK had put together. By the time we get to the later part of his term in office, some of the international crises have, I won't say calmed down, but they've become less frequent. So he's able to dedicate a little bit more time and attention to this ever-growing civil rights movement, and he had put together, him and his administration, a Civil Rights Act to try and address some federal changes to do this process. This act is part of the New Frontier. We learned about that on Monday, which of course is his collection of laws and policies as president. This is a massive, again, march that takes place right through the Capitol. There are over 250,000 people who show up to participate in this march. Just like a lot of the other demonstrations, it's about, again, disrupting the day to day and bringing attention to something that people have for a long time ignored or didn't really think about too much. This march went through the city and ended at the Lincoln Memorial, which of course holds a special importance to the African American community, as Abraham Lincoln is known as probably at that point the first and only president to do something major to try and create equality in our country for African Americans. On the steps of his monument, Martin Luther King Jr. is going to deliver probably his most famous and well-known speech, which is the "I Have a Dream" speech. The link that is on this slide and that's on, again, connected to the rest of this, I would again give a listen to it. It is something that, of all of his speeches, it's probably the one that's most moving. Just you get a really good sense of who he is as a leader and what he is hoping to see accomplished through this process. The march itself goes off without any major incident, I would say, but the reaction in the days and months following is really, it's just disappointing. This whole movement, there's a certain disappointment that feels throughout this whole process. So the reaction that happened, because of course, like this march, like so many other, is well documented, well covered by the news. People are seeing it. Uh, Unfortunately, what it stems is violence, more people who are frustrated and don't want to see change, resisting that change. A really tragic event occurs in Birmingham, Alabama, where in your assignment that you guys have got out there about the Birmingham jail letter, is taking place that same city in Alabama where four young girls are going to be killed by a bomb being thrown through a church window. And it's not uncommon that churches are targeted during this time period. As we know, the SCLC is a Christian league, so it's something that unfortunately they take a lot of the targeting in this time, and it's a massive tragedy that these four young girls who were basically taking refuge in that church are going to perish. After the bombing of that church, it again basically erupts into a riot in Birmingham, and two more people are going to die in that unrest. And in the months following this, JFK is going to be assassinated. Like I said, we're going to talk more at the beginning of next unit about his assassination. It's a hugely important thing to keep in mind. But he is going to be assassinated in Dallas in November of 63, that same year. And I'm not trying to say that there is a direct link between this, but I do want to bring attention to the fact that things are getting more and more serious in the United States. The 1960s is a tumultuous decade with a lot of violence and a lot of just changing of who we are as an American people. And JFK's assassination is just one of many violent occurrences that happen all within the same time period. Um, what we do see happen as a positive coming out of this march and all of the things that occur right after the fact is the passage of the very first Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, and you should put a big star next to this one, and it's important to understand here is that it's part of the new frontier, but JFK is gone, so his vice president, now president, LBJ or Lyndon Baines Johnson, is going to push it through. There's not a lot of time left in this, again, term in office that JFK didn't get to see. So LBJ, while he is in office, is going to kind of try and see things through to the end. And then, of course, he's making plans for how he's going to handle things going forward. He's very different to JFK in a lot of ways. Regardless, he is going to be supportive of civil rights as much as he can. The Civil Rights Act is going to ban most discrimination in employment in public places. So the individual court cases we've talked about thus far have been doing kind of like small scale, like ticking one thing off of a list at a time. What the Civil Rights Act was meant to do is to try and blanket that and get rid of a lot of the separation and discrimination that was happening for jobs in public places like parks and, again, restaurants, things like that. It also is going to enlarge the federal government's power to be able to protect people who are trying to, again, follow these new laws where others are resisting and stopping. It's trying to speed up desegregation as much as possible to get things moving, to keep things moving, I suppose, forward. And so, like I said, Lyndon B. Johnson, or Lyndon Baines Johnson, was the vice president under JFK. It was a very conscious decision when JFK ran, remembering that he was pretty inexperienced. He didn't really have a lot of, I guess, just goodwill going for him. So he wanted to have someone who was very experienced, and Lyndon Johnson is definitely that, come in as his vice president and to be able to win groups of voters that JFK couldn't alone. Lyndon B. Johnson is a Southerner from Texas. And he definitely was coming in with a strong personality. People knew him well, and he was very helpful to helping JFK win the election of 1960 and to move forward with this. In 64, we've got a new election year, and LBJ wants to continue being president, so he is going to run as the Democratic candidate. He spends a lot of the campaign talking about the issues at home, the things that JFK had hoped to address while as president but didn't have the time. So looking at poverty, looking at discrimination, of course, he had the support of the people. The one thing that we'll talk about again later is the fact that LBJ, during this campaign, this is right when the Vietnam conflict was, well, it was at a turning point. We'll talk, like I said, next unit. But he, during the campaign, was very publicly against intervening more in Vietnam. He didn't think it was a real solution to the problems that were going on there. His opponent was Barry Goldwater. He was the Republican candidate at that time, and he very much was focused on the international issues going on in Vietnam with Cuba, which is something that we'll talk about again next unit, where he wanted to flex our muscle. He wanted to use the might of our country. We'd spent 10 years creating a nuclear cache that could wipe out any enemy. And he definitely thought that we should go to Vietnam and we should use as much as we could to try and get that finished. This brings up an interesting moment in history, in my opinion, where campaigning has changed in 64. People recognized after JFK's masterful use of TV and the debates that, again, campaigns could also be part of the, I guess, media consumption of the day. Johnson, again, took note and he used TV to help win in a lot of ways, specifically in running ads. You can thank this time period for all of those wonderful political advertisements that you get all the time. Again, LBJ and his campaign team came up with a lot of ads that were trying to freak people out, specifically about the Vietnam War and basically the different approaches that could happen here. I would definitely give a watch to the probably one of the most famous campaign ads that's ever existed, which is the Daisy Girl ad. It's LBJ, and it was so disturbing to the American public that they only aired it once, but it was impactful. You should give it a watch right now. Pause me, watch the video. When you come back and you see this, you're going to see that, well, ultimately, the message here is that if you vote for Barry Goldwater in 64, cute little girls who are picking daisies and don't know how to count are going to get blown up by nukes, which is, of course, over dramatic, but it worked because LBJ won, and he didn't just win, he won in a landslide. With LBJ taking control of the White House, he is coming in with his plan set. He spent the past year tying things up with JFK's New Frontier stuff, and now he's going to be going into his own with the Great Society, is what he called it. The Great Society is the legislative plan to try and, again, raise the standard of living, which addresses the ideas of poverty, and then create equal opportunity, which, of course, is looking at the discrimination in our country. LBJ's background is actually in education. He was a teacher in Texas, in Austin, Texas, for a long time. So he is going to pass a lot of different kinds of laws. His Again, once we start listing all the different things that he does with this great society, I'm hoping it's going to remind you of who you think that LBJ is, who his role model is. So we've got, again, different laws like the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which provided more money for textbooks and materials. He passed laws that gave scholarships for colleges to financially assist artists. He helped create public broadcasting system, or PBS. And healthcare, he is going to, again, basically create Medicare, Medicaid, or at least to expand upon those ideas from earlier in American history. Medicare is hospital insurance and low cost medical insurance for almost every American who is 65 and up. So Medicare is looking at the elderly. Medicaid is extended to those who are receiving other welfare benefits through whether it's unemployment or if they had disability or something like that. He is going to pass some different items and create some different groups to focus on housing. Housing is, of course, something that those who are living in poverty have a tough time being able to have access to nice, reliable housing. So the Housing Act, the Omnibus Housing Act, is money to build low-income housing, so housing projects. It's something we'll talk a little bit about later on. HUD, again, or the Housing and Urban Development branch, is going to be, again, updated a little bit. And we're going to see that LBJ, who already has helped pass the Civil Rights Act of 64, is going to also appoint the very first African American as secretary in his cabinet, his group of advisors. And the Housing and Urban Development is where they're going to be located. He's also going to pass an Immigration Act, open the doors. We're trying to get more people to come into the country. They're going to end a lot of the quotas that have been in place for a long time to allow for more immigration and more people coming in to help kind of boost our economy and boost our growth as a nation overall. I've got environmental stuff. He is going to try and get us to start taking notice of the pollution that is all across the nation. The Water Quality Act is about cleaning up rivers. He's going to help set aside more forest preserves. He's going to set emission standards for new cars. Cars up until that point, they were pumping out all kinds of nasty stuff in the air, and it was not something that anyone monitored. Going to put air pollution guidelines out there. He's going to create consumer protections. Again, especially with cars, by the time we get to the 1960s, everyone has a car. Like, everyone does. So the National Traffic and Motor Safety Vehicle Safety Act, it's going to set federal standards. A lot of states had different kind of expectations for car manufacturers, but nothing on a nationwide scale. Again, updating labels on products, putting out safety programs for a highway system, establishing the Department of Transportation, which did not exist yet. Again, states had things like that, but there wasn't anything federal overall. Whew. It's like a lot of stuff. And I'm hoping that it's starting to sound kind of familiar because LBJ, like FDR, was kind of just throwing a bunch of laws and items at the wall and hoping things would stick and they would start to address some of the new problems that are developing in our country or had developed in our country by that point. But you can see here that there's a lot of different laws, a lot of different things being passed. And just like FDR, you would expect that there'd be some resistance, some pushback happening. And it just happens that LBJ is going to benefit from a very supportive Supreme Court. The Warren Supreme Court, as it's referred to, the Chief Justice was named Warren, is going to be very liberal, basically, is going to support a lot of the things that he is going to pass, as well as help to pass a lot of the major decisions based off of civil rights throughout this time. So this is just a list of some of the things besides the board versus Brown versus Board of Education, besides desegregation of all these various different places, but also it's going to ban prayer from public schools. Again, there has to be a line between school education and religion. They're going to limit censorship. Segregation in schools, like I said, is unconstitutional. They're going to redraw election districts. Again, reappropriation. This is something that still is an issue today. Again, rights to people accused of crimes. The Miranda rights. Again, you probably have heard the Miranda rights if you've ever, or at least the beginnings of them, if you've ever watched any show where someone's been arrested. You have the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, blah, 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 all that kind of good stuff. And they're going to help support LBJ in a lot of his efforts throughout his time as president. And that's all the notes for today. You guys can put your notebooks away. The last thing, of course, in here is just work to be completed reminders. Again, the only big official assignment that is due by the end of tomorrow is going to be the letter from a Birmingham City Jail looking at our active reading. So please make sure that you're looking for those directions and getting that submitted correctly. Also, you're going to see today that I have posted the review packet for Unit 4. Just like always, it's an option. It's not required. It has to be done by the 7th. Again, not by Wednesday the 7th, by Tuesday the 7th. That's my bad. Again, before your assessment on Wednesday, the assessment is going to be a little different to the one we had previously, but still electronic, still within again, it has to be done on Wednesday the 8th.